Okay, we will get on with the second part of the talk now. So you recognize now we are up to the third stage in Allah's creation of the physical existence, where He has created atoms. Now, after Allah created after he filled the universe with hydrogen, helium, and various particles just going around, not connected to anything. At certain points, there would be these are not by nature all an exact distance from each other. So in places there will be clumps of hydrogen and helium that are more dense than other places. And those places where they are more dense, I'm not going to go into the true theories of gravity. I'll just go into gravity as we normally think about it. That the places where there were more stuff together than other places exhibited more attractive force than the places where there were little bits of matter, and the places where there were a lot of matter started attracting the bits of matter that were not so dense and not so clumped together. And so what we end up with, hydrogen and helium here, grouping into and I'm going to just stop for a minute because I remembered something I wanted to say from the first talk that I forgot to say and that is very important. This idea of the singularity here that I am presenting, this is not the Big Bang theory. It is still often referred to as the Big Bang theory because the Big Bang theory was a nice and attractive name that caught on. I said a little bit about this last week. The Big Bang theory essentially said in the beginning, it didn't say there was a singularity. It said all the matter of the universe was in one place, couldn't stay there because of the pressure and exploded outwards. That theory has been just totally discounted. There are no scientists who still hold to that. They then agreed that it began in a singularity, as I have presented here now. At first it got called inflationary theory because it's a big inflation, a quick inflation of the universe, and now it is just referred to as the singularity theory. But this one that I am presenting is generally consistent, and by the way, all of this that I am telling you, up to and including when I get to the progression of biological life. I mentioned this also last week, but maybe not everyone was here, that has been looked at by many theoretical physicists around the world without them claiming there were any major errors at all. And the man who won the 2003 Einstein Prize in Physics, John Archibald Wheeler, said that all of the physics was correct, and he generally agreed with the worldview that I am presenting that is behind it. So just so we don't get mixed up that I'm talking about Big Bang. Big Bang is still a name that is hanging around, but the theory itself is gone. Big Bang implies there was a whole lot of stuff that exploded, and that just wasn't the case, and everyone knows that now. Now, what Allah did is He sent direction to this hydrogen and helium. Once again, by gravity, they group into first-generation stars. So when we hear in class that these first-generation stars that were made up of just the hydrogen and helium and the free particles that were floating around in the early universe, we have to remember once again, gravity is a name that scientists have put on the fact that Allah had the matter come together. Once again, Allah sent from outside of space and time light in its absolute sense. And whether we want to refer to these messages that come in, you know, angels can come in any form at all. I don't want to say that these messages are not sent by angels. It is possible that these light messages that are sent by Allah from outside of space and time are angels in a form carrying messages to every bit of matter. Or it can just be a medium that Allah uses to talk to tell matter what to do, to direct the matter. But if we want to look at it as angels, I don't think we have any difficulty with that. So Allah sends messages to the hydrogen and helium to form into big groupings, which we call first-generation stars. And scientists will say that happened by gravity. So gravity is just the name we put on Allah's process of grouping the hydrogen and helium into stars. These are really huge stars. These stars may be 100,000 times or more bigger than our sun. Really, really huge. And they are only made of hydrogen and helium. And then they collapse on themselves. And then by nuclear fusion, which means you take so you squeeze a hydrogen and a helium together with enough pressure, or if you squeezed, I think 8 hydrogens or four heliums, or any other combination, so that you end up with 8 protons and 8 electrons, you end up with oxygen. And by this way, in nuclear fusion, in these first generation stars, Allah created +100 atoms. We don't know exactly how many. Now remember earlier I said on Earth today, Earth and our sun, Earth and our sun have 93 different atoms. So where did these others go between the 93 and the 100+? Because these were, 93 is actually uranium. Uranium will not always stay uranium. Eventually, all the uranium in the world will end up being lead, eventually, after billions and billions more years. But some of these particles, because it has a half-life, in other words, after every so many years, half of the uranium will have turned into lead. But it is a lot, but it decays really slowly. But these are much more radioactive elements. And some of these have a half-life of like maybe a trillionth of a second. And so, although they came to exist for a very short time, they were gone very quickly also. So we basically end up with 93 atoms being spread through the universe. And other than the hydrogen and helium, all of these 93 different atoms, from lithium to uranium, formed in the center of these first generation stars by pushing the various smaller atoms together and making larger and larger groupings of uranium. There's 93 protons in the middle and 93 electrons outside, and it has a whole lot of neutrons because I won't go into this part, doesn't really matter, but because of the way protons react with each other, it's necessary to have some neutrons in there to sort of balance them and keep them in a harmony. So all of these 93 elements are formed in these first generation stars. Now, I think, once again, I'm going to mention something that is important later on. You notice when Allah went from the subatomic particles to the atoms, He did not make subatomic particles, leave the subatomic particles, and then make atoms, separate from the subatomic particles He had already made. He made the atoms from the subatomic particles that He had already created. When He wanted to have more complex atoms than the hydrogen and the helium, He put them together into first generation stars and pushed them together in a process that physicists will call nuclear fusion, until all of the other heavier atoms came to be. So you notice He used the smaller elements to make the bigger elements. He did not leave he could have just left hydrogen and helium and created a universe that also had the other 91 elements or atoms, but He didn't do that. He used the smaller ones and put the building block. He starts with a basic building block and He keeps putting them together to make more and more complex levels of organization of matter. So now at stage 3, we have now these first generation stars, they were so big and the pressure was so great that they couldn't exist like that. So they exploded in what we call supernovas. And these supernovas spread these 93 different elements, mainly still the hydrogen and helium, out through the whole universe. And so we have now a universe full of exploding first generation stars because they lived a relatively short lifetime. And a universe filled with 93 different atoms, plus some of the original hydrogen and helium that never got formed into first generation stars, plus some of the original particles which never got formed into atoms. And then they start to clump together in the same way that the first generation stars did. And then we get second generation stars. But these, instead of having 2 elements, oops, doesn't work to write an equal sign that way. These 93 different atoms now form into second generation stars, which our sun is either a second or subsequent generation star. So the second generation stars are made up of 93 different atoms, but they form differently because they are not just all light gases. Some of them are very heavy things like iron, and it doesn't come rushing into the center. And just as when you have water in a bathtub and it's going out and it swirls around, as the gases come together, they tend to swirl around. This is the way Allah has made things like gases and water. When they come together, they swirl. And as they swirl around, most of this stuff comes into the center and forms a big center. But around it, there are streams of stuff out here, and they, in their orbits, form planets around it. And our star is called a yellow dwarf. Our sun is called a yellow dwarf. It's called a yellow dwarf because its color is yellow, and among suns it is small, but it is a very, very common one. You know, maybe I mean, certainly, you know, there's 10,000 billion stars in the known universe, right? Well, say, for instance, it is much more common than this, but say, for instance, only every one of them, only one out of every 1,000 was the yellow dwarf. Instead of 10,000 billion, we would have 100 billion. 100 billion stars like our sun. Every star like our sun is on the inside will have small hard planets. And on the outside, big gas planets. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail about this yet, but we have to consider the possibility that, which I think it is at least hinted at in the Quran, and by many scholars more directly than hinting, that this is not the only place in the universe where Allah has created biological life. Because theoretically, around every yellow dwarf sun, where there are small hard planets, and these small hard planets will have roughly the same kind of elements that we have, everywhere where water can exist in a liquid form, it is very likely Allah has created biological life. We don't know for sure that He has, but He certainly might have, given the way that he works. Because He works in a very lawful manner. Now, so from the second generation stars comes Earth. Forms around one of the second generation stars. And the stuff that makes up the Earth is these 93 elements. And they start to cool. And so these elements, by their nature and by the nature of being in space where something hot and something that is cool, the heat tends to go out, the Earth cools down until, you remember I say that Allah keeps using the stuff that He has created, the various stages that He's created, to create the situation so that a new stage can come to be. So in the beginning, the Earth is just really hot. It is just actually molten. It is like a small sun, but it is not hot enough to have nuclear fusion going on in it. It is not big enough to have nuclear fusion like the sun had. So it's getting energy from the sun, which is keeping it from cooling as quickly as it could, but it is cooling fairly fast until it develops starts to develop a hard crust on it. And we still live in a world with a hard crust, that most of the inside is molten iron. It is still in a boiling hot state. And in the second generation stars and on the Earth in the beginning, the atoms, all 93 elements is just another name for atoms. Those 93 atoms, they stay as individual atoms. But when the Earth cools sufficiently, after Allah has changed the environment enough, for example, we know that is the case, right? So the way that this actually looks is, I mean, I don't want to say for sure that this is the way the atom is put together, but if I draw it correctly. So this is roughly what a water atom looks like. It is, it has 8 protons in the middle, and it has 2 electrons of its own, and then it has 4 other electrons of its own in its second orbit. But atoms like to have full orbits. So because Allah likes things in the universe to be harmonious. A harmonious thing has a better chance of existence. So it shares an electron with 2 hydrogens. So we really have 2 hydrogens mixing together with an oxygen, actually. Yeah. So we have an oxygen which has 8 protons in the middle, but it only has total 6 electrons, and it would like 2 more. So it shares 2 electrons with 2 hydrogen atoms, and they become a unit. And this unit is now no longer an atom, it is a molecule. And I want to stress once again, Allah did not just leave these 93 elements as He had made them and then create the molecule of water. He used the building blocks of some of these 93 atoms to put them together to make water. Where He could have, if He wanted, right, He could have created this separate and then this separate. But He didn't choose to. He chooses to keep building upon one after the other. And He told the hydrogens, the 2 hydrogens and the oxygens, through the messages from the absolute, from outside of space and time, through absolute light, sends messages to them, just as it sent messages to the individual particles to stand together as atoms. Now it tells the individual atoms to stand together as molecules, and they exhibit a very different quality. Here we have 2 different gases, clear gases. When they are put together, they form water. But what about salt? Sodium chloride. Just to give an example of how very different things can be. Salt is something that makes up we couldn't exist without salt. And in our blood is a whole lot of salt. In our bodies is a whole lot of salt. Without salt you die. So these 2 of the 93 elements, we have sodium and chloride. Sodium is a silver-colored metal that is very, very reactive to water, and if you drop it in water, it will explode. And it is very, very poisonous. Chlorine is a yellow gas, which if you breathe it will kill you quickly. It'll destroy your lungs. So it is a very strong poison also. So you put a silver metal and a yellow gas that are both terrible poisons together, and you get a white crystal salt, which is necessary for our life. I mean, which is just incredibly amazing. But what it shows is how different the characteristics of something can be when they go from their individual state to a combined state. So then, you remember I said you will never get like a electron and a half or a proton and 2/3, and you'll never get a helium and a half. I mean a helium and a half or hydrogen and 2/3. There are only certain atoms that can form, and there are other atoms which cannot form. The number of atoms which can form is very, very small compared to the number of atoms which could not form. I mean, just statistically, if you took 93 elements and said how many different ways could you combine them, the number would be unbelievable. But the number of actual atoms that exist in the universe and that can exist in the universe is a relatively small number. It is probably in the millions. I don't know exactly, but I would say roughly in the millions. So once again we see that at every level, Allah has set, does not just let things happen randomly. He has set certain rules by which things can form, and they cannot form other than those rules. So there is no chance process. When the light becomes subatomic particles, there is no chance process. When the subatomic particles become atoms, they become certain ones with no chance of others. When the atoms become molecules, they can become certain molecules with no chance of others. So we have the molecule here being number 4 stage. Now, all of this we understand well. We understand now which a chemist, because chemistry and physics has joined together, we now know which atoms which molecules can form and which cannot. It was already clear which elements could form and which could not because we could just see them. And if you tried to make anything different, you could not. But now they know which molecules can form and which cannot. So all of these stages in the first 4 stages, we know quite well. Then it starts to get more complex. Because, and you'll notice, like with the atoms, we start with simple atoms and we go to complex atoms. When we get to the molecules, the first molecules that form on the planet, or actually the first molecules don't actually form on the planet, the first molecules form out in space. And they are just all atoms of the same type, like iron. All the iron atoms just join together in a molecular bond called a monatomic bond. So actually the first atoms form in space. The first atoms formed of more than one kind probably form on the surface of the planet. But they are just simple ones, like water and ammonia and methane and a few things like that, which are just 2 simple elements joined together. And then the elements start to get more and more complex joining, and the molecules become more and more complex. Now, these molecules, they actually, we start with monatomic. Then we have 2 kinds. I won't bother with the names exactly. I'm sorry. And unfortunately, I have today forgotten the names of the, anyone know enough chemistry to know the name of the two simple ways that diatomic and the other one, covalent. So there's two different ways that two atoms can join. And then after the two atoms joining, we have groups of atoms joining. And at this point, we end up with, oh, I should have restudied this. In other words, so you get combinations of here we have a group of two, here we have combinations of groups, right? So,
polyvalent?
no, we're not to polymers yet. I think
Ionic.
Organic?
Ionic.
Hmm?
Ionic.
I'm sorry, actually, yeah. The diatomic was not one of them. The first one here was ionic. But here I think we get to organic. Where you have groups of atoms, several groups of atoms joining together. And then you get combining, it looks like randomly. I don't want to say randomly, I'll say non-ordered. And then we get polymers. No, I'm sorry. Organic, let me go down to the end here, maybe if I work back the other way. Which is groups joining in an ordered manner. So here we have two atoms like this. They just join together, such as the water molecule, two or more. Then we have, and this is a group. Then we have several groups joining together, but they are non-ordered, so they will look like, these are not individual atoms, these are groups. Then we have groups joining like this. This is what I mean, groups joining in an ordered manner. These are just sort of random. So they're just a bunch, and then they get in an ordered manner.
There is amino acids. for protein amino acids after polymer building block protein amino acids.
No, amino acids are already there. Amino acids are organic molecules, so it includes amino acids. No, this is all of them, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's it for sure. So then we have proteins formed, and proteins, I won't draw all of them like this, I'll just draw each one of this group as one. And a protein is and these are groups joining in an ordered manner, which are chains. Polymers are chains, and their ordered manner is always in a chain. A protein is chains with side chains. And then we have a DNA molecule, which is assuming all of these are joined, right? I'm not going to draw them all in. So Allah starts with a really simple one, all one atom of the same, then puts two atoms or more to join together into groups. Then he puts several groups together to make organic molecules, including amino acids, which are the basic building blocks of all life. Then he makes them into polymers, so they end up in being long chains that can stretch and they can actually grow. Then he gets to proteins. And the benefit of having chains with side chains is when you have a molecule which is a chain with side chains like this, they can go into all sorts of different forms. For example, a protein that is a red blood cell, it forms a sort of, this chain forms like a shell that can hold oxygen, an oxygen molecule within it. And so it carries oxygen around the body, that particular form of protein. Then we get to the DNA molecule, the most complex of all. It can actually store and pass on information. So, once again, Allah starts with the simple and goes to the complex. But He does not do so through, He could have just created this one and then created this one separate from these, but He takes each one of the groups and He builds upon the previous groups. Too bad there's not three sides to this. I think unfortunately I'm going to have to erase this one. So now we go to stage 5. Now stage 5, remember I said with those first 4 stages, we know those first 4 stages really well. We know exactly what energies the photons have to come into to produce certain particles. We know what atoms the particles can join to become. We know what we know what molecules can be made from the atoms. but we have just barely learned to know what molecules can be made from the atoms. So that's sort of the limit of our physics and chemistry together. But physics and chemistry together actually, eventually, equal biology. And we don't know biology nearly as well as we know physics and chemistry. So, just as I cannot tell you exactly how Allah created the first one-celled organism, but with biological life, we start with but I will say this: the most complex of the molecules, they have the ability to perceive what is around them. If there are other molecules or atoms that they would like to use, they can break down those other molecules and assimilate them and use them in a way very much like we would consider using food. The most complex molecules can reproduce their own kind. And the most complex molecules have a very small degree of mobility. And they also have a cell wall to protect them from other molecules attacking them, to keep them safe from the outside environment. You might notice we have digestion and reproduction and a cellular nature, which are also the characteristics of one-celled organisms. Except one-celled organisms, the difference is and we'll forget viruses and bacteria because I'm not quite sure where they fit, but an actual one-celled organism is just an undifferentiated or not particular cell shape, and inside is just which is what we refer to as the scientific name for live material, biological live material. So Allah has made a change from getting close to this, but being inanimate, to changing it to having a life characteristic. And so we end up with an amoeba, one-celled organisms. But actually, as time goes on, one-celled organisms, they progress also. And it, I don't know that it really smiles, but it looks a little bit like this rather than like that. So even within the level of the one-celled organisms, Allah started making the very simple, and He keeps making one-celled organisms to progress, which is one of the things I want to say is you remember I said Allah has a grand cosmic plan. His grand cosmic plan seems to be that He is going to create from light matter, subatomic particles of matter. And His plan is for these subatomic particles to constantly, He is going to be constantly grouping them into more and more complex organizations. And when light creates a subatomic particle, light has Allah has breathed some of His spirit into light. And when the light becomes the subatomic particles, some small portion of the spirit that Allah has breathed into light gets breathed into the subatomic particles. But because the subatomic particles are so small and are so limited in their ability to express characteristics, they cannot express very much of the spirit that Allah has breathed into light, and then through light into them, or been imbued by light or put by light into the subatomic particles. So Allah then goes through a series of stages of building more and more complex groupings of subatomic particles so that the qualities that he has imbued into matter from light can be more and more perfectly expressed. Then we have multi-celled organisms. And you know, it took, I think, something like 2.5 billion years or something from one-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms. The reason was Allah used one-celled organisms to change the environment to create an environment where multi-celled organisms could exist in harmony. He didn't create the multi-celled organisms right away. All of this building toward creating an environment eventually where he could put Adam. All of these stages are working towards the eventual creation of Adam. And these are such things as sea sponges. And then one organ. That one organ usually happens to be a stomach. And so we have something that is made up now, not of just, it is made up of groups of cells. This is a group of cells. And this is made up of groups. And one organ is like a jellyfish. So it is only several different kind of groups, mainly around the stomach. And then we get to multi-organs. And these are things like starfish. And these multi-organ, they are groups of groups. Starfish. Let me just number this 4 twice. I want to be sure I get this right. So starfish just has its various organs in different places in it, or like a clam or things like that. They're not, your organs are not really placed in a regular manner. Next one you go to things like whatever is before fish, worms and insects. And these have their organs. Mouth, stomach, reproduction, elimination. So these animals have all of this: mouth, stomach, reproduction, elimination, but they are just in various places. But you get to the multi-organed in order, and they become in a state like this. I don't know whether I want to say to insects, because I have a different reason for insects here. Say worms and some other things which I can't name because I forget the names of them. I want to put another stage in here. Doesn't really matter whether. Which now basically have a body like this, but they have side chains going off that body. And then the central nervous system is involved in chains with connections, which, like the neurons in the brain, they are actually chains, and they are connected to others. So although I did this in a somewhat disorganized manner, I apologize for it. Does everyone sort of see the process that Allah went through? He created one cell, then from one cell he made multi-celled, all of the same cell. Then he made several groups, which were in groups, but they were all cells of the same kind. Then he put several different groups together. Then he put several groups together, making one organ of several groups. Then after he had one organ, he made them with more than one organ. And then he put the organs in an order. And then after he put the organs in an order, he put side chains on those orders. On those ordered, because all of these also have, mouth, stomach, reproduction, elimination. And then the final stage is to have chains connected with other chains inside the brain, which is the neuronal system, which stores and passes on information. Now, does anybody see any connection with anything here? Basically, you'll see a very similar process. Remember I say Allah has a grand cosmic plan which He wants to unfold? He starts with all of one atom, or all of one cell. Then He puts several atoms together of different kinds. And then He joins several into a group. Then He puts several groups together in a disordered manner. Then he puts groups together in an ordered manner. Then he puts groups together in an ordered manner with side chains. And then he links the side chains in such a way that they can store and pass on information. Which is very similar to what happened here. I mean, almost identical to what has happened here in biological life. Now, although as I have admitted, we do not know yet enough about biological life to say we understand all of the workings of biological life by any means. We don't even understand how a one-celled organism works. It is so complex compared to a complex molecule. We understand complex molecules really well. But the step between complex molecules and biological life is a very complex step. So, but we do see that the same process is going on. And we might assume, we might logically assume by the process called extrapolation. Extrapolation means if I say a series of numbers to you, 2468, 2468, what is the next number? See, you are likely to say 10. It isn't sure it's 10, right? But it is very probable it is 10. So when we see that Allah has used the same process to go from one stage to the other, that He built subatomic particles on light, that He built atoms on subatomic particles, that He built molecules on atoms, and in each one of those stages went from the simple to the complex, it is very likely to assume that He made biological life on the basis of the complex molecules that He had formed, started from the simple and went to the complex, and that is what we see happening. So it looks like one continuous process. Now, this is sort of basically the same pattern the evolutionists would say. It took this pattern. But the difference is, you remember I said how Allah sends messages from outside of space and time through light to every subatomic particle to tell it how to join together into an atom. And He sends messages from light to every atom to tell how to join together into a molecule. We then must assume that He sends messages from outside of space and time through light to tell every molecule how to join together to become a one-celled organism. And then when you want to go from one stage to the other, it is very simple for Allah to do this. So I'm going to just erase half of this board here now. This is basically what an evolutionist would say has been the development of biological life: the amoeba, sea sponge, jellyfish, starfish, worm, insect, fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal. And you notice I put here mammal simple to the complex. At every level here, like the one-celled organisms, every one of these, like the one-celled organisms that started as the amoeba, Allah kept them progressing, sending information through light, through absolute light to the organisms to change their structure until they eventually became so complex they are a paramecium, showing some of the characteristics of higher levels of biological life. So we have the same thing in mammals. We have very simple mammals, and we have mammals that go all the way up to the smartest one we think we know is. I don't know what the simplest of the mammals is. So the question is, Darwin saw this and he said, well, how does this happen? And he thought, well, sort of natural selection, the characteristics that each one of these shows that are beneficial and move it in a progressive manner will be more likely to be passed on in the genetic material, and each one will get more and more complex. Two problems with this. One of them is that even if natural selection worked, there would not be time to get up to the chimpanzee from the amoeba unless the universe was billions of times older than it is. That is one problem, even if it did work. The other problem is they have never found between these and even between species in the mammal world or any of the other world, they do not. There is the problem of the missing link, which is a great embarrassment to evolutionists. So the answer to the missing link is that all of these, the amoeba on down, they work on the basis of a DNA molecule, which carries the information that tells how to put together an amoeba. And Allah made this DNA molecule as the most complex, is one of the about the most complex, or the most complex of the molecules. And the DNA molecule allows Allah to use exactly the same process to go from one stage to another. I hope I'm not boring too many people because of the 3 or 4 people I see sleeping. I hope that, I know it is a very, very technical lecture, right? But it needs to be a very technical lecture to get these ideas across. And this is a very important part of it. Natural selection just cannot get you there, and there is no question that it cannot get you there. I mean, there's nobody now saying it can get you there. It just cannot. And neither can what was that other one called? Genetic mutation. But since what we see happening all the way along is Allah is sending information from outside of space and time through absolute light to the bits of matter to tell them to reorganize into more and more complex groupings. So he creates a DNA molecule that says, create an amoeba. And by the way, how much identical DNA would you imagine an amoeba shares with a human being? You know, you would think, oh, not very much. About 10%. And I just put the animal world here. I didn't put the vegetable world. But if you get up to a tree shares about an identical 40% DNA molecule with a human being. So it looks like what Allah has done in His grand cosmic plan, He has developed it to the point where He creates a complex molecule that passes on information to tell the matter around it how to organize into the form that He wants. And so, I'm not going to draw a whole DNA molecule, but say this is the DNA molecule for an amoeba. And it ends at that point. And He wants a sea sponge. All He has to do is just send the message from light to the subatomic particles around to organize a few little more particles on the end of this DNA molecule, and we get a sea sponge. And as we go down all the different levels,